Something happened between 1994 and 2000 that changed tactical RPGs forever. The jump to 32-bit hardware gave developers room to breathe, and that window of time produced more ambitious, more personal, and more daring tactical RPGs than any era before since. Super Robot Wars F is technically inaccessible to most Western players. It was never officially localized, and that fact alone explains why it belongs on this list. Released in 1997 for Saturn and PlayStation, this is the entry that demonstrated how tactical RPGs could function as genuine love letters to entire genres of fiction rather than standalone stories. The premise is a crossover tactical RPG spanning dozens of mecha anime series, playable as a unified force against shared threats. For fans of those properties, seeing those characters standing alongside each other while sharing tactical resources is the ultimate fan service. The game earns its crossover premise through the seriousness with which it adapts each series' story beats. The tactical layer uses a system where pilot skills, mech stats, and special attacks create an enormous customization space. Upgrade paths for individual units require meaningful resource allocation. The morale system rewards aggressive play. Pilots who engage frequently build momentum that unlocks more powerful attacks, creating incentives to stay in the fight rather than protect units passively. What makes this notable is difficulty and scope. The mission count is enormous, storytelling dense, and resource demands push into genuine challenge. The full story wasn't even complete in F. It concludes in Super Robot Wars F Final, which compounds the commitment required. The obvious caveat is the language barrier. Players rely on fan translations to follow the narrative. The systems engage mechanically, but the crossover storytelling is the actual point. For mecha fans willing to use translations, this is the series at its most ambitious. Shining Force 3 is the most ambitious project Camelot ever attempted, and the most tragic victim of the Saturn's commercial collapse in the West. Released across 3 separate scenarios in Japan between 1997 and 1998, only the first scenario reached North America, leaving Western players with a third of a story that's never been officially completed in English. The first scenario follows symbiotes navigating a peace treaty unraveling into war. The writing is more politically nuanced than earlier entries, presenting antagonists with comprehensible motivations. Decisions about alliances carry consequences. The tactical combat refines everything Camelot learned from the first 2 games. Unit positioning relative to terrain, facing direction affecting defense, and a relationship between movement range and attack options create a system where small decisions compound into significant advantages or vulnerabilities. New unit types introduced across the 3 scenarios add variety that the single Western release only hints at. What the Western release captures incompletely is Shining Force 3's full design ambition. The 3 scenarios share save data. Characters you recruited in Scenario 1 appear in 2 and 3, and events you witnessed from one perspective carry different meaning viewed from another general's position. The fan translation of Scenarios 2 and 3, completed after years of work, finally made the full experience accessible. Where the game struggles, even in complete form, is late game pacing. Some scenarios drag before their conclusions, and certain difficulty spikes feel like padding. Hobbled by commercial circumstances, Shining Force 3 still represents 32-bit tactical RPG ambition at its most uncompromising. Growlancer occupies a strange space in the tactical RPG landscape. Technically a real-time strategy game with pause, but one so invested in character relationships, branching narrative, and long-term party management that it belongs entirely to the RPG tradition. Released in 1999 by Careersoft, this became the foundation for a long-running series, and the first entry holds up as a quietly extraordinary debut. Combat unfolds in real time across open environments. Units move fluidly, cast spells, and engage through collision rather than turns. The pause system lets you queue actions mid-battle. Fights felt like events rather than calculations. Ring skills, which were abilities attached to characters through equipable gems, create a flexible customization system that develops personality over time. Choosing which skills to cultivate, which to sacrifice for new combinations, builds attachment to individual units beyond their stats. The relationship system measures character bonds and affects story outcomes and battle performance simultaneously. Characters who fought together and built trust perform more cohesively, and the narrative reflects that social architecture in ways that feel organic rather than mechanical. The PS1 presentation hasn't aged well. Environments are sparse and models stiff. The story front-loads exposition, and new players face real investment before the narrative finds momentum. For players who've exhausted the era's grid-based offerings, Growlancer offers something genuinely different. Tactical depth expressed through momentum and relationship, rather than positional calculation. Dragon Force doesn't look like a tactical RPG from a distance. It looks like a spectacle. Up to 100 soldiers clashing on screen simultaneously. Generals with distinct fighting styles cutting through formations. Massive battles that take over entire screens with motion and noise. But underneath that visual chaos is a strategic game of remarkable depth that rewards careful thinking over button-mashing instinct. Released in 1996 by Sega for Saturn, Dragon Force lets you choose from 8 monarchs, each with different political situations, unique generals, and distinct narrative trajectories, and build their kingdoms toward domination of the continent. The strategic layer involves territorial expansion, castle management, general recruitment, and alliance decisions that carry long-term consequences. Selecting the right troop type creates rock, paper, scissors logic. Cavalry shatters infantry. Monks counters samurai. Your general's combat ability determines what happens when forces meet, adding personal skill to the strategic picture. What I found most compelling was how the 8 campaign perspectives told genuinely different stories about the same conflict. Playing as Junon presents entirely different challenges and encounters than playing as Wine, even when their paths cross. The replayability is built into the structure itself. Troop management is broad rather than granular, and general stats make optimization feel inevitable once you understand upgrade paths. The translation is serviceable but loses nuance. For the Saturn generation, this was the definitive large-scale tactical experience. Langrisser 4 rarely gets mentioned when people talk about the series, and that's a genuine oversight. Released in 1999, this entry refines the commander troop system that defines its tactical identity and builds around it some of the most elegantly designed scenarios in the entire franchise. Commanders lead troops that absorb damage and extend attack reach. Managing troop attrition shapes resource decisions that compound. Losing troops early weakens your tactical footprint for every engagement that follows. Class evolution branches here feel more consequential than in earlier entries. The available paths push in genuinely different tactical directions, and locking into the wrong branch for your playstyle costs real progress. Experimenting with alternative class trees requires restarting, which makes each decision feel appropriately weighty. The map design reflects that tactical seriousness. Objectives vary between survival, capture, and defeat-specific unit conditions, and the maps punish passive play more aggressively than prior entries. Enemies take initiative in ways that demand positioning rather than reactive defense. But without familiarity with the series' mythology, the narrative lacks grounding. Names and factions arrive without sufficient introduction. Some scenarios have difficulty spikes that punish underleveled parties without clear warning. For players invested in the series, this demonstrates this game's systems at their peak. Vandal Hearts hit the PlayStation in 1996 before Final Fantasy Tactics made the genre mainstream. and it deserves enormous credit for that timing. Konami shipped a tactical RPG with a genuinely dark political narrative, a branching class system, and gameplay clean enough to welcome newcomers while offering enough depth to reward dedicated players. You follow Ash Lambert, a soldier whose loyalty transforms into disillusionment. The writing frames every betrayal in broad strokes, but the emotional clarity works. Characters are defined by their convictions, and watching those convictions collide creates real stakes. Combat moves fast for the genre. Grids are manageable, turn order is clear, and class promotions reward careful play without punishing casual investment. The iconic blood splatter animations, red arcs that fly dramatically across the screen when units take lethal hits, became the game's signature, memorable for both their excess and their strange elegance. I still think about how effective that visual feedback was at making each kill land with weight. Branching class evolution gives characters distinct identities over time, and the variety of unit roles keeps party composition interesting. Terrain matters without being punishing. The difficulty curve teaches mechanics steadily, but narrative depth can be a weakness. Characters receive clear motivations but limited development. The world's history is interesting but underdeveloped. The later levels spike in difficulty without proportional complexity, leaning on enemy volume rather than tactical challenge. As a gateway into 32-bit tactical RPGs, Vandal Hearts remains the most accessible of its generation. Front Mission 3 is the entry that opened the series to a global audience. A mech-based tactical RPG set in a near-future world where geopolitical tensions, corporate warfare, and military ethics create a backdrop that still feels unervingly relevant. Released in 1999, this is the game that proved the genre could carry genuine sci-fi world-building rather than borrowing exclusively from fantasy archetypes. The premise splits early into two separate campaigns covering the same conflict from different perspectives. Each route withholds information the other reveals. That structural ambition was rare in 1999. Wanzer customization is where I spent most of my time between missions. You build your mechs from individual component parts: arms, legs, body, backpack, selecting weapons, equipment, and pilots whose stats affect how each configuration performs. The depth is staggering, and the system rewards obsessive tinkering. A chassis optimized for close-range brawling performs completely differently from one built around long-range artillery support. Combat on grid-based battlefields emphasizes positioning and range management. Body part targeting adds tactical granularity. Disable an arm, and an enemy loses weapon access. Destroy legs, and movement drops. Counter mechanics require anticipating enemy formations rather than simply reacting to them, though it does lose some momentum in its pacing. Cutscenes are frequent. Some missions repeat objectives without escalating complexity. The early learning curve discourages players before the systems open up. The world building rewards patience, and the dual route structure rewards completion. Few tactical RPGs from this era build a setting with this much considered depth. Tactics Ogre is the tactical RPG that proved the genre could carry the weight of genuine political tragedy. Originally released in 1995 on Super Famicom before reaching PlayStation, this is Yasumi Matsuno's masterwork, a game that asks what you're willing to do to win a war and makes you live with the answer. The story follows Denham Powell through a brutal ethnic conflict on the island of Valeria. Early on, the narrative forces a decision, one that defines your entire play through and shapes the kind of leader Denham becomes. There's no correct path. The Chaos Frame system tracks the morality of your actions across every battle, affecting which characters join you and how factions regard your army. I played through the Law, Chaos, and Neutral routes, and each felt like a distinct moral argument rather than a cosmetic variation. The combat matches that thematic weight is how deliberate it is. Unit placement on terrain that affects movement speed. Height advantage altering attack range. spells that clear over time rather than instantly, demanding you account for their trajectory. Characters die permanently if you lose them, or stay dead if you can't reach their body in time. Every battle felt like something that mattered. The writing is dense and occasionally opaque, with political factions and names that take time to untangle. Some players find the slow build impenetrable. The class system requires significant investment to master, and suboptimal builds can lock players into unwinnable situations. No other tactical RPG from this era trusted its audience as completely. Tactics Ogre built a genre template that designers are still referencing 30 years later. Sayuki Journey West adapts one of Asian literature's most famous epics into a tactical RPG with enough mechanical creativity to justify its existence beyond novelty. Released in 2001 by Koei, this game follows a female interpretation of the monk Tripitaka traveling with her companions toward India, and the tactical innovation it builds around that journey is genuinely interesting. Each party member can shift into a beast form with unique attacks and expanded movement. The question isn't just where to place your units, but when to spend the transformation. Beast forms drain quickly. Elemental field tiles shift during combat, altering unit strengths and weaknesses as the battle develops. What works in the opening turns may become a liability midway through. Adapting to those shifts requires reading ahead and building roster versatility. It's one of the more dynamic environmental systems in any PS1 tactical RPG. The character writing gives the journey warmth. The companions bicker and support each other with genuine personality, and the group's dynamic shifts as new members join. The tone sits between spiritual road trip and tactical challenge, which is unusual enough to stick in memory. But it isn't polished enough. Some maps are too long, and the difficulty curve has awkward spikes that feel less designed than accidental. The elemental system, while creative, can punish players who didn't invest in versatile rosters without clearly explaining why a strategy failed. The game is quiet about its own depth, which probably explains why it remained invisible to most players. Arc the Lad 2 is the rare sequel that makes its predecessor feel like a prologue. Released in 1996, this game takes the modest tactical foundations of the first Arc the Lad and expands them into something far more ambitious. A genuinely large-scale RPG with a dark, politically complex narrative that earns comparison to the best stories the PS1 produced. The story follows a young hunter whose traumatic past connect to the conspiracy threatening the world through channels neither he nor the player fully understands early on. The writing earns its emotional stakes, with character deaths that land because the game spent real time building those relationships. Watching the world deteriorate as the story progresses creates a sense of genuine dread that lighter tactical RPGs rarely attempt. Save data from the first game transferred progress into the sequel, letting returning characters arrive with their experience. Ambitious continuity designed years before Mass Effect made it mainstream. Combat evolved from the first game, faster, deeper, with more tactical options per unit and encounter design that demanded genuine strategic thinking rather than brute force. Character abilities complement each other in ways that reward building a cohesive party rather than simply leveling the strongest units independently. The working design's localization added personality that elevated the script, though some choices are playful to the point of anachronism. Momentum is lost in its length. The campaign is long enough that pacing occasionally flags in its middle section. Some late-game difficulty spikes are punishing without feeling instructive. As the saga's centerpiece, this is where the series proved it had something to say. Brigandine is the game that asks what would happen if you applied grand strategy logic to a tactical RPG and then made every nation genuinely worth leading. Released in 1998, this is continental warfare across 6 distinct kingdoms, each with its own ruler, military philosophy, and narrative trajectory. wrapped around turn-based battles that decide territorial control. The strategic layer operates on a seasonal cycle. You deploy commanders across your borders, recruit creatures to bolster their squads, and decide whether to expand aggressively or consolidate. Every decision has resource implications. Spreading too thin invites counterattacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Managing 3 fronts at once while growing your most promising commanders requires genuine long-term thinking. Commanders lead squads of mythological creatures, wyverns, golems, demons, undead, each evolving through multiple forms. Choosing which to invest in, which to discard, and which combinations create synergies became its own obsession. I restarted campaigns just to explore build paths I'd neglected. The tactical battles themselves are resolved on small maps with enough unit variety to keep encounters interesting. The strategic context lends every fight meaning. Losing a key commander doesn't just end a battle. It opens a border and invites retaliation. The balance, however, is all over the place. Some nations are dramatically more powerful than others, making certain starting choices objectively better. Difficulty scales inconsistently based on starting faction. The story for individual nations is thin, brief cutscenes that suggest depth without delivering it. As a pure strategic fantasy sandbox, nothing from this era comes close. Cardia, the Word of Fate, arrived in 1998 carrying a premise so conceptually bold it almost collapses under its own ambition. Words have power, literal, creative power. The Cardia system lets characters write creatures into existence, summon weapons and armor from written incantation, and reshape the battlefield through language. It's one of the most symbolically coherent magic systems ever built into a tactics game. 2 parallel campaigns, Toxa and Lacrima, run simultaneously, with events in one affecting the other. What you see through Toxa's eyes casts different shadows through Lacrima's. Players who engage with both find a quietly sophisticated tragedy. Yoshitaka Amano's character art gives the game a mythic visual identity immediately distinct from everything else on the platform. His hand-painted aesthetic transforms even routine scenes into something that looks like illustrated fantasy literature rather than software. Combat is grid-based but elevated by the summoning system. Phantoms, creatures conjured through Cardia cards, extend your tactical options considerably. Their lifespan is finite, which makes every summoning decision a resource management choice rather than pure aggression. The dual campaign structure requires real-time investment before the full picture emerges. Difficulty is uneven, some maps trivial, others demanding near-perfect play without clear warning. The Amano art, the dual narrative structure, and the Cardia creation system make this one of the most intellectually distinctive tactical RPGs of the entire era.